It started on a quiet, ordinary afternoon. The sun was low in the sky, casting a soft golden light through the windows of the small town where the protagonist lived. The streets were calm, almost sleepy, and there was a gentle chill in the air that hinted at the coming of evening. On days like this, the world seemed to slow down just a little, giving space for moments that could change a life. And for the protagonist, this day would become one of those moments. They had always been curious about the world around them, noticing details that others often overlooked. The way a leaf danced in the wind, the patterns clouds made across the sky, the faint hum of distant voices carrying stories unknown. But music for them had always been something ordinary, background noise to the rhythm of daily life. Songs came and went, catchy tunes that were popular for a season, but they never lingered. That was until they stumbled upon a small, seemingly forgotten record store, tucked into a corner of the town. Its windows dusty, and its sign worn by time. The store had a certain charm. It smelled of old paper, polished wood, and the faint trace of something sweet that seemed like memories trapped in air. The protagonist pushed the door open, and a little bell tinkled above their head. Inside, the air was cooler, and shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, stacked with vinyl records, CDs, and a few old instruments in corners. Everything was quiet except for the soft creaking of the wooden floor beneath their feet as they wandered through the aisles. Something caught their eye. A section labeled Classical Masterpieces. It seemed almost forgotten, tucked between more popular genres like rock and pop. The protagonist felt a strange pull toward it, almost as if the records themselves were calling out. They reached out and picked up a record, the cover showing a serene landscape with soft colors and elegant lettering. The title read something that seemed familiar yet mysterious, as if it carried a promise they couldn't quite name. Curiosity won over hesitation. They carried the record to a small listening station near the back of the store, where a turntable waited like a quiet guardian of forgotten stories. Carefully, they placed the needle on the vinyl. The first notes filled the air, delicate and slow, almost fragile, like the sound of a distant memory trying to surface. It was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The music washed over them, gentle waves of sound that seemed to move not just through the ears but through every fiber of their being. Time seemed to stop. The bustling thoughts of daily life, the worries and routines, all faded into the background. The protagonist felt a strange mix of emotions: peace, longing, wonder, and a deep, almost aching sense of beauty. They leaned closer, eyes half closed, letting the music carry them to a place they had never been. Each note felt alive, each pause filled with meaning, as if the composer had whispered secrets across centuries. For the first time, it realized that music could be much more than entertainment. It could be a mirror of the soul, a window into the mind and heart of someone who lived long before them. The idea was intoxicating. The protagonist stayed there for hours, listening to more pieces, each one opening doors to new emotions and thoughts. There was something almost magical in how the music could make them feel deeply without words. Without explanations, simply by existing, the store owner, a quiet man with a gentle smile, noticed the fascination. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just watched with a knowing look. He had seen this many times before, the spark of discovery, the awakening of curiosity that came when someone truly listened to classical music for the first time. He didn't need to say anything. The music was speaking louder than words ever could. The protagonist left the store that day carrying more than just records. They carried a newfound awareness, a sense that life was bigger and richer than they had imagined. They walked home slowly, holding the records carefully, thinking about the stories behind each composition. Who had written this music? What were they feeling? What had inspired them to create something so timeless? At home, the protagonist set up the record player carefully, almost ceremoniously. The living room was quiet except for the soft hum of the turntable. The first record went on, and as the familiar notes filled the room, they closed their eyes, letting themselves be absorbed completely. They could see the world in a different light. Each corner of the room seemed brighter, each shadow deeper, each sound sharper and more alive. The music had awakened something inside them, something that had been dormant. Waiting for this very moment, the next days were filled with exploration. They borrowed books about composers from the library, read about Beethoven's struggles with hearing loss, Mozart's playful genius, Bach's intricate compositions. Each story added depth to the music, making it even more powerful. The protagonist learned to listen actively, to notice the subtleties in rhythm, harmony, and emotion. They started to understand that music was not just notes on a page or sounds in the air, it was a language, a conversation across time, a bridge between people and their deepest emotions. Friends noticed the change too. The protagonist seemed calmer, more thoughtful, more aware of the world around them. When they shared a favorite piece, the reactions were mixed. Some friends didn't understand. Some were intrigued, but none could deny the passion in their voice when they spoke about the music. The protagonist realized that this journey was not just personal. It could touch others if shared with care and sincerity. They began to attend small concerts in the town. The first time they heard a live orchestra play, the experience was overwhelming. The sound was fuller, more alive than any recording. Every instrument had its voice, every note felt intentional, every pause carried meaning. The conductor's hands moved like a storyteller, guiding the musicians and the audience through a journey of sound and emotion. The protagonist sat in the audience, completely absorbed, tears forming without even realizing it. They understood more deeply than ever that classical music was a living thing, breathing and moving, capable of transforming a moment, a day, a life. Even in everyday life, the music lingered. Walking down the street, they would hum a melody, feeling its rhythm sync with their heartbeat. Sitting in the park, they could hear the wind like an unseen orchestra, the rustling leaves as percussion, birds as violins. Life itself became musical. Each experience a note, each emotion a chord. The world seemed to carry the music naturally, and they carried it in return, in their thoughts, their movements. Their interactions with others, this first encounter with classical music, especially the initial discovery of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, became a turning point. The protagonist realized that there were 15 essential masterpieces they wanted to understand, to feel, and to share. Each one promised a journey, a new set of emotions, a story waiting to unfold. And so, what started as a casual curiosity turned into a quest, a desire to explore the depths of human expression through music. Days turned into weeks, and the protagonists continued their journey. They made lists, wrote down thoughts, noticed patterns, remembered feelings each piece evoked. They even started to experiment, playing some notes on a borrowed piano, trying to understand the mechanics of music through hands-on experience. Each effort, each experiment, each new composition listened to brought joy and fulfillment. Even when the challenges seemed too big, the music demanded patience, attention, and care. And the protagonist embraced these demands wholeheartedly. The first part of this journey was about awakening, the realization that music was alive, that it carried stories, emotions, and wisdom. It was about curiosity, about noticing the small things that make life rich and meaningful. The protagonist discovered that classical music was not something old and irrelevant, but something timeless, capable of touching the heart in ways that nothing else could. It was a companion, a guide, and a teacher all at once. By the end of these first weeks, the protagonist could no longer imagine life without the music. It had become part of their routine, part of their identity, part of the way they experienced the world. They understood that this was only the beginning. There were more masterpieces to explore, more stories to hear, more emotions to feel, and with each note, each composition, each performance, they would continue to discover not just music, but themselves. The journey had begun on a quiet afternoon in a small record store, with a dusty record and a simple decision to listen, but it had grown into something much bigger, a journey of the heart, mind, and soul. The protagonist knew that they had stepped onto a path that would change them forever, a path where music was not just sound, but life itself, waiting to be felt, understood, and shared. After the first encounter with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the protagonist felt an unstoppable urge to explore more. The record store visits became regular, almost daily, as they hunted for compositions that would speak to them in the same way. Each day brought a new discovery, and each discovery brought a new sense of wonder and respect for the music. They realized that every piece carried not just melody and rhythm, but history, struggles, triumphs, and the personal expressions of those who had lived centuries before. Their next discovery was Bach. The protagonist had always heard the name, but never understood its significance. Picking up a record of Bach's air on the G string, they felt an unfamiliar calm as the first notes played. The music was structured, elegant, and perfectly balanced, unlike anything they had heard before. It was as if each note was carefully placed, a conversation between order and emotion. They listened for hours, noticing how each variation brought a subtle change in feeling. Like the turning of seasons, or the movement of clouds across a wide sky, Bach's music taught them to appreciate patience and intricacy. It required attentive listening, a slow unfolding of understanding. The protagonist began to notice this patience reflected in life itself, how some experiences needed time, how beauty could be found in detail, and how the quiet moments often carried the deepest significance. It was a lesson in mindfulness, as much as it was in music. After Bach, Mozart became the next adventure. The lively, playful, sometimes a mischievous character of his symphonies was a stark contrast to the serenity of Bach or the depth of Beethoven. Listening to Mozart's Symphony No. 40, the protagonist felt lightness in their chest, a sense of joy that was hard to describe. The music was energetic yet refined, a dance between intellect and emotion. They imagined the composer himself, a young genius, full of curiosity and energy, creating music that could delight and challenge at the same time. The protagonist's exploration was not limited to records and libraries. They started attending small concerts, local recitals, and eventually larger orchestras in nearby cities. The experience of live music was transformative. The vibration of instruments, the synchronization of musicians, and the conductor's expressive movements all combined to create a powerful emotional experience. Each piece was more than sound, it was life itself, shared between the performers and the audience. A communal heartbeat of emotion and understanding, Chopin's nocturnes soon became a personal favorite. The intimacy and delicacy of his piano compositions resonated deeply. The protagonists found themselves returning to Chopin in quiet moments, late at night, or during times when they needed reflection. There was a melancholic beauty in these pieces that mirrored human vulnerability. Listening to the music, they sometimes found tears, other times smiles, and always a sense of being understood by someone who had lived long before them. As they delved deeper, they began to see patterns and connections between composers and their lives. Beethoven's struggles and resilience, Bach's devotion to structure and spirituality, Mozart's playful creativity, Chopin's tender melancholy. Each story added depth to the music. The protagonist started to understand that classical music was not just about sound. It was a reflection of human experience, carrying emotions, philosophies, and dreams across generations. This realization sparked a personal practice. The protagonist began to dedicate time each day to listening with focus. They would sit quietly, close their eyes, and let the music guide their thoughts. Sometimes they would write reflections, noting feelings, images, or memories the music evoked. Other times they would simply sit and breathe, allowing the music to wash over them without analysis or expectation. It became a ritual, a conversation with history, with emotion, and with themselves. The music began influencing their daily life. They noticed small changes, a new sense of patience, a deeper ability to empathize, and a stronger appreciation for the beauty in ordinary moments. Walking through the town, they could hear life's rhythm differently. The wind rustling through leaves like a soft accompaniment, the distant laughter of children like joyful notes, and even the quiet hum of the town as a gentle background harmony. Life itself became musical, and the protagonist felt a deeper connection to everything around them. Friends and family began to notice the change. The protagonist spoke of music with a kind of reverence that was unusual. At first, the audience was puzzled by this new passion, unsure how a genre often considered old-fashioned could hold such power. But slowly, curiosity replaced skepticism. A friend would ask to hear a favorite piece. A sibling would share a moment of quiet listening. Music began to create new connections, bridging gaps between different people, different generations, different experiences. The protagonist also started experimenting with their own interpretations. They had access to a piano, and though they were not formally trained, they found joy in trying to play pieces they loved. Each attempt taught patience, attention to detail, and self-compassion. Mistakes were not failures, but part of the learning process. Playing music themselves created a deeper understanding of the effort, skill, and emotion behind each masterpiece. They began to feel a personal bond with the composers, imagining their struggles and triumphs as they pressed each key, listening intently to every note. One day they discovered Vivaldi's Four Seasons. The vibrant energy and vivid imagery in the compositions fascinated them. They could picture spring's gentle blooms, summer's warmth, autumn's falling leaves, and winter's quiet stillness through the music. It was as if the seasons themselves were performing for them, and in that performance, life felt fuller, richer, more textured. They realized that music had the power to transform imagination, to create worlds, to evoke experiences that words alone could not describe. The protagonist's quest was becoming more purposeful. They wanted to experience all 15 essential masterpieces fully. To understand the diversity and depth of classical music, they began making notes, keeping lists, tracking emotions, and comparing experiences. Each composition was a new journey, each note a step into unknown territory. The process was immersive, demanding, yet endlessly rewarding. Their evenings often ended with quiet listening sessions, sometimes with friends who had started sharing the journey, sometimes alone, reflecting on the day and letting the music speak. They learned to appreciate silence between notes, the pauses that gave music its shape, the subtle shifts that revealed layers of emotion. It was a practice of mindfulness, attention, and presence that began to influence all aspects of life. Tasks felt lighter, conversations deeper, and emotions more nuanced. Music was no longer background. It was a teacher, a companion, and a guide. As months passed, protagonists could trace a path through the 15 masterpieces, noting how each one contributed something unique. Beethoven's depth, Bach's precision, Mozart's joy, Chopin's intimacy. Vivaldi's imagery, they began to see a rich tapestry of human expression. Each piece a thread in the larger fabric of emotion and creativity. They realized that these works had endured centuries for a reason. They spoke to the universal human experience, connecting past and present, composer and listener, heart to heart. There were moments of struggle too. Some compositions were complex, difficult to understand or appreciate at first. Some required repeated listening, patience, and careful study. Yet each challenge brought satisfaction, a deeper reward, when the music finally revealed its secrets. The protagonists learned to embrace difficulty, to value effort, and to celebrate small victories. Music became a mirror for life's challenges, teaching perseverance, observation, emotional intelligence. The protagonist also began to explore the lives of the composers, reading biographies, historical accounts, and letters. They discovered the human side of genius, struggles with illness, family and society, personal triumphs, moments of doubt, and flashes of brilliance. This connection made the music even more meaningful, as they could now hear the composers' heart in every note, feel their joy, sorrow, and determination. The music became a dialogue across time, a reminder that human experience is shared and enduring. By the end of this part of the journey, the protagonist had a growing understanding of what made these 15 masterpieces essential. They were not just beautiful music, they were windows into human history, emotion, and creativity. Listening had become an act of exploration, reflection, and connection. Each piece was a story, each note a word, each melody a chapter in the ongoing narrative of human experience. The journey through these masterpieces was far from over. The protagonist had learned that music required attention, patience, and openness. It demanded presence, an openness to feel and understand, and a willingness to be changed by what was heard. The first steps had been taken, and the path ahead promised countless moments of discovery, joy, and transformation. And through it all, They understood that music in its purest form was not just something to be heard, it was something to be lived. The protagonist's journey had reached a stage where music was no longer just something to enjoy, but something that influenced how they saw the world. Each day brought new experiences, both in listening and in living. They discovered that classical music had a way of teaching patience, empathy, and emotional awareness. It became clear that the pieces they were exploring were more than melodies. They were guides, offering insights into life, human nature, and the beauty hidden in ordinary moments. It started with noticing how different pieces affected their emotions. A bright and lively symphony would lift their spirits when they felt tired or anxious. A slow and contemplative nocturne would help them process difficult feelings or calm their mind after a stressful day. Music became a companion, one that could understand without asking questions and console without needing words. The protagonist realized that these 15 masterpieces, each with its own unique voice, were tools for reflection and growth. One afternoon, they decided to explore the story behind one of their favorite pieces, Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. They watched a recorded performance and read about the composer's life. Tchaikovsky had faced many personal struggles, yet he created music filled with grace and beauty. The protagonist noticed that the music seemed to carry a sense of longing and hope at the same time. Each note felt like a message, a reminder that even through hardship, something beautiful could emerge. This idea began to resonate beyond music, influencing how they approached challenges in their own life. With every piece they explored, the protagonist began to understand the subtle emotions hidden within. They could sense tension building in a symphony long before the resolution, the delicate dance of highs and lows in a concerto, the way a pause could make a moment feel profound. These observations taught them to notice similar patterns in life, how moments of quiet could be meaningful, how struggles often led to growth, and how beauty could be found in contrast and complexity. Music had become a lens through which they viewed the world. The protagonist also started sharing music with others, not to impress or teach, but to invite them into this world of emotional discovery. They played recordings for friends, describing the feelings they experienced while listening. Some friends were skeptical, but others were intrigued, drawn in by the sincerity and passion of the protagonist. Slowly, small circles of shared appreciation formed, creating a community that valued music not just as sound, but as an emotional and cultural experience. One evening, while listening to Debussy's Clair de Lune, the protagonist reflected on the quiet beauty in simplicity. The music was delicate, almost fragile, yet profoundly moving. They realized that not all impact had to be grand or loud. Sometimes the most meaningful experiences were subtle, requiring attention and presence. This insight influenced how they approached relationships, work, and even daily routines. They began to slow down, noticing details, appreciating small gestures, and finding joy in moments that had previously gone unnoticed. As they continued, the protagonist explored more composers, such as Mendelssohn, Brahms, and Schubert. Each brought something unique: Mendelssohn's elegance, Brahms's depth, Schubert's lyricism. The protagonist began to notice that their mood and thoughts were shaped by the music they listened to, but also that they could approach music with curiosity rather than expectation, letting it guide them rather than trying to control the experience. This approach brought a sense of freedom, a way to let go of rigidity and allow themselves to be fully present. The protagonist also found inspiration in the lives of the composers. Learning about Beethoven's determination despite hearing loss, Bach's devotion to his craft, and Chopin's sensitivity to the world around him gave them perspective. They understood that great music was often born out of human struggle, its perseverance, and a willingness to express emotion fully. This realization encouraged them to embrace their own challenges, to approach life with the same dedication, and to value authenticity over perfection. A significant part of this journey was attending live performances. The protagonist learned that live music had a power that recordings could never fully capture. The energy of the musicians, the vibrations of instruments in the room, the shared experience of the audience, all contributed to a feeling of connection. Each performance was unique, offering new interpretations, subtle changes, and moments of unexpected brilliance. Experiencing music live reinforced the protagonist's belief in the transformative power of these masterpieces. Alongside listening and attending concerts, the protagonists began experimenting with creating music themselves. They did not aim to become a professional, but they found joy in trying to replicate melodies or improvise their own pieces. This hands-on experience deepened their understanding of composition, rhythm, and emotion. They realized that even small efforts to create could lead to greater appreciation and empathy for the composer's work. Music was no longer just a passive experience. It became an active dialogue between listener and creator. The protagonist also began keeping a journal of their musical experiences. Each entry described how a particular piece made them feel, what memories it evoked, and the thoughts it inspired. Sometimes they would reflect on personal challenges or joys, noting how music helped them process these experiences. Over time, the journal became a record of growth, insight, and emotional connection. It was proof that classical music was not only about listening, but about living fully and attentively. During this period, they discovered the emotional power of Beethoven's symphonies. The grandeur, intensity, and complexity of his compositions were unlike anything else. The protagonist could feel every struggle, triumph, and emotional nuance as they listened. These pieces demanded full attention and emotional engagement, teaching them to be present to face intense feelings and to appreciate the full spectrum of human emotion. Listening became a form of emotional training, preparing them to handle both joy and sorrow with grace and awareness. Another transformative experience came with exploring Rachmaninoff's piano concertos. The emotional depth and technical brilliance fascinated them. They learned to appreciate the balance between complexity and clarity, how intricate patterns could coexist with sweeping melodies. Each listening session revealed new layers, new subtleties that were missed before. The protagonist realized that music required patience, attention, and an open heart, qualities that also applied to life itself. The protagonist's appreciation for music also grew through comparison and contrast. They would listen to multiple interpretations of the same piece, noticing how different conductors or performers brought unique perspectives. A single melody could evoke different emotions depending on tempo, dynamics, or phrasing. This awareness taught them that perspective mattered not just in music, but in life. Different approaches could reveal new insights. Being open to multiple viewpoints could deepen understanding. Music also became a source of comfort and healing. The protagonist noticed how certain pieces could calm anxiety, lift spirits, or provide clarity during confusion. They began to use music intentionally, selecting compositions to match or shift their mood. Over time, they developed a nuanced understanding of how sound, rhythm, and melody could influence thought and emotion. Music was no longer just entertainment. It was a tool for personal growth and emotional balance. Sharing music became an essential part of the journey. The protagonist started hosting small listening sessions with friends and family, guiding them through the emotions and stories within the music. These gatherings were informal but meaningful, offering opportunities to connect, reflect, and experience music collectively. Observing others' reactions, the protagonist realized that the emotional power of music was universal, crossing boundaries of age, experience, and culture. The pieces they loved had the ability to touch anyone who listened with an open heart. As weeks turned into months, the protagonist felt a growing sense of purpose. They understood that their journey through these 15 essential masterpieces was not just about personal enjoyment. It was about connection, connecting with the past, with the composers, with the emotions embedded in the music, and with the people around them. Music had become a bridge, a way to understand life more deeply and share that understanding with others. Through this journey, the protagonist also learned the value of routine and consistency. Daily listening, reflection, and practice created a rhythm that brought balance and focus to life. They noticed improvements in concentration, emotional intelligence, and creativity. Music had become a guiding force, shaping not just leisure time, but the way they approached challenges, relationships, and personal growth. The protagonist's relationship with music became deeply personal. Each masterpiece carried memories, lessons, and emotional resonance. They could hear a note, and be transported to a specific moment, recalling the feelings, thoughts, and surroundings of that time. Music became a diary of emotions, a record of personal growth, and a source of endless inspiration. The 15 masterpieces were no longer just compositions. They were companions, teachers, mirrors reflecting the human experience. By the end of this phase, the protagonist understood that music was a lifelong journey. There was always more to learn, more to feel, more to explore. The initial excitement of discovery had matured into a deep, sustaining passion. Classical music was no longer an external interest. It had become an integral part of life, influencing perception, behavior, and understanding. It was a constant presence, guiding, inspiring, and teaching in ways that words alone could not. Through Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Tchaikovsky, Debussy, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, and others, the protagonist had begun to experience the transformative power of classical music. Each masterpiece offered a lesson, an emotional journey, and a connection to humanity across time. They had discovered that music was more than sound, it was life, motion. As the protagonists delved deeper into the world of classical music, they began to realize that the journey was not always easy. While some pieces brought immediate joy or understanding, others were challenging, dense, or emotionally intense. There were compositions that seemed inaccessible at first, their complexity intimidating and overwhelming. But the protagonist understood that these challenges were part of the process. To truly appreciate and internalize the music, they had to face the difficulty, remain patient, and allow the layers to reveal themselves over time. One such experience came with Mahler's symphonies. The sheer scale of the compositions, the interplay of numerous instruments, and the emotional depth required the protagonist to listen repeatedly. At first it felt chaotic and confusing, but they persisted, listening for patterns, themes, and motifs. Slowly, they began to understand the structure and meaning. They realized that the initial difficulty was intentional. The music was reflecting life itself, with its complexities, contradictions, and overwhelming beauty. This insight taught them resilience and the value of persistence, lessons that extended far beyond music. During this time, the protagonist also faced personal challenges. Life was not always calm and serene. There were stressful days, moments of doubt, and situations that demanded patience and emotional strength. Interestingly, classical music became a source of support during these times. Listening to a comforting nocturne, a passionate concerto, or a reflective symphony offered solace and guidance. The music seemed to speak directly to their experiences, providing understanding and emotional release without judgment. It became a private sanctuary, a place to process feelings and gain perspective. The protagonist's understanding of music deepened when they began studying the historical and cultural context behind each masterpiece. Learning about the times and environments in which composers lived gave the music new meaning. They discovered how Bach's compositions reflected his devotion and discipline, how Beethoven's struggles shaped the intensity of his works, and how Mozart's social context influenced the elegance and wit in his symphonies. This awareness added layers of depth to their listening, transforming it from a purely emotional experience to an intellectual exploration as well. At the same time, the protagonist experimented with combining listening with other activities. They would read literature while a symphony played softly in the background, or take long walks accompanied by the rhythm of a concerto. They noticed that the music altered their perception, enhancing focus, inspiring creativity, and deepening emotional engagement. Everyday experiences became intertwined with the music, making the world feel richer and more vibrant. Life itself seemed to carry a symphony of sound, rhythm, and emotion, waiting to be noticed and appreciated. The protagonist also explored lesser-known composers and works, discovering hidden gems that were not as widely celebrated but equally powerful. These discoveries reminded them that music was vast and limitless, with endless opportunities for learning and enjoyment. They began to appreciate that personal connection mattered more than popularity. A composition that spoke directly to their heart was as essential as any world-renowned masterpiece. This perspective encouraged open-mindedness, curiosity, a willingness to explore beyond familiar territory. One particularly transformative experience occurred when the protagonist attended a live performance of a large orchestra playing a challenging symphony. The energy in the hall was palpable, the musician's synchronization mesmerizing. The conductor's movements guided the performance, bringing each section to life with precision and emotion. The protagonist felt completely immersed, experiencing the music not just through hearing, but through sight, vibration, and shared presence. It was a moment of profound connection, a reminder of the communal power of music. This live experience also highlighted the differences between recordings and performances. Recordings offered clarity, accessibility, and convenience. Live music brought immediacy, unpredictability, and a sense of shared humanity. The protagonist realized that both forms were valuable, each offering unique insights and experiences. They began to balance listening to recordings for detailed study and reflection with attending live performances for immersion and emotional resonance. As their journey progressed, the protagonists began to notice how classical music influenced their interactions with others. They became more empathetic, patient, and attentive in conversations. The emotional sensitivity developed through listening, and studying music translated into a deeper understanding of human behavior. They could sense unspoken feelings, respond thoughtfully, and appreciate the nuances in others' experiences. Music had become a teacher of emotional intelligence, offering lessons that were applicable in every aspect of life. The protagonist also started to share their journey in a more structured way. They created playlists of the 15 essential masterpieces, each chosen for its emotional, historical, and musical significance. They wrote notes about the impact of each piece, the feelings it evoked, and the context behind it. Sharing these playlists with friends and family became a way to connect, inspire, and foster appreciation for the music. They noticed that when people listened with attention, even briefly, the emotional power of the compositions became evident, creating moments of shared insight and joy. During this period, the protagonist began to experiment with reflection and meditation through music. They would close their eyes and focus on individual instruments, listening to the subtle interplay of melody and harmony. Sometimes, they would follow a particular motif throughout a composition, tracing its variations and emotional shifts. These exercises heightened awareness, attention to detail, and emotional engagement. They learned that music could train the mind as well as touch the heart, offering a holistic experience that nurtured both intellect and feeling. The protagonist also became interested in understanding why certain compositions resonated more than others. They explored theories of music perception, emotional response, and cognitive patterns. They discovered that music had the power to evoke memories, alter mood, and influence thought processes. This knowledge enhanced their listening, allowing them to approach music with intention, curiosity, and awareness. They realized that the emotional impact of music was both universal and deeply personal, a unique interplay between the composition and the listener. Another important lesson came from observing the composers themselves. The protagonist was struck by the dedication, discipline, and resilience required to create these masterpieces. Many composers faced personal hardship, societal challenges, and financial difficulties. Yet their passion for music drove them to persevere. Understanding this human struggle added depth to each note, revealing the courage, vulnerability, and creativity behind the works. It was a reminder that greatness often emerges from adversity, and that dedication to one's craft could yield enduring impact. The protagonist's engagement with music also began to shape their imagination. They visualized scenes, stories, and landscapes while listening, letting the melodies guide them into worlds beyond the immediate. A symphony could transport them to a bustling city, a peaceful countryside, or an emotional journey of triumph and loss. These imaginative experiences enhanced creativity, emotional understanding, and appreciation for storytelling. Music became a form of narrative capable of conveying complex emotions and experiences without words. Through these experiences, the the protagonists developed a deeper understanding of the importance of balance. They learned to alternate between deep, focused listening and casual enjoyment. Between analytical study and emotional immersion, they recognized that music offered multiple layers of experience and that each listener could find their own path, pace, and perspective. This flexibility reinforced the idea that music was inclusive, adaptable, and capable of enriching life in many ways. By the end of this stage, the protagonist had transformed their relationship with music into something profound. It was no longer a hobby or casual interest. It was a central part of life, shaping perception, emotion, and understanding. The 15 essential masterpieces had become a foundation, a toolkit for exploring the human experience, and a source of inspiration, comfort, and connection. Music was not just heard, was felt, understood, and lived. The protagonist understood that the journey through these masterpieces was ongoing. Each new listening experience, each new performance, each reflection added depth and meaning. They had learned that music required patience, attention, and openness, and that the rewards were immense. Beyond beauty, beyond entertainment, music offered insight, emotional resonance, and connection across time and culture. It was a living, breathing part of life, a source of wisdom, joy, and inspiration. Through the struggles and discoveries, the moments of challenge and triumph, the protagonist realized that classical music was a companion for life. It could guide, teach, console, and uplift. It could reflect human emotion, inspire creativity, and deepen understanding. And as they continued to explore, they knew that the remaining masterpieces would offer new journeys, new lessons, and new opportunities to experience the transformative power of music. The path was far from complete, but the protagonist embraced it fully, ready for the next chapter of discovery and connection. By the time the protagonist reached the final stage of their journey, through the 15 essential classical masterpieces, the experience had become transformative in every sense. The music had evolved from simple enjoyment into a profound companion, shaping their emotions, thoughts, and perception of the world. It was no longer just a collection of compositions, but a living, breathing guide through the complexities of life. Each piece had left its mark, teaching lessons that extended far beyond notes and rhythms. Beethoven's symphonies had instilled resilience and the power of persistence. Bach's intricate works had taught patience and attention to detail. Mozart's lively compositions had brought joy and creativity. Chopin's intimate piano pieces had opened doors to vulnerability and introspection, and Vivaldi's vibrant Four Seasons had inspired a sense of wonder and imagination. Other composers had added their voices to this rich tapestry, each contributing a unique emotional and intellectual lesson. The protagonist often reflected on how music had influenced their daily life. Walking through familiar streets, they no longer moved blindly through the world, but noticed subtle details, the way sunlight shimmered on a window, the rhythm of footsteps passing by, the soft murmur of conversations around them. Music had sharpened their perception, teaching them to be present, to notice, and to feel. Life itself seemed to unfold like a symphony, each moment a note contributing to a greater composition. They continued attending live performances whenever possible, savoring the energy, spontaneity, and shared experience that only a live orchestra could offer. Each performance was different, revealing new interpretations, subtleties, and emotions. The protagonist began to notice how even a single variation in tempo or emphasis could change the mood of a piece entirely, teaching them that perspective and approach were as important in life as they were in music. Sharing the music had become a mission. The protagonist curated playlists, offered guidance on listening, and sometimes organized small gatherings where others could experience the emotional depth of classical compositions. They noticed that when people listened with openness, the music resonated deeply, evoking feelings, memories, and reflections they hadn't anticipated. Music had become a bridge, connecting people across age, experience, and background, proving that these masterpieces were not relics of the past, but living expressions that still had Relevance today, the personal impact of these masterpieces was undeniable. Listening had become a practice, a form of meditation, and a tool for understanding life's challenges. In moments of stress, anxiety, or sadness, they turned to a nocturne or a slow symphony to find solace. In times of celebration or triumph, they chose a lively concerto or vibrant overture to amplify joy. Music had become a companion in every emotional state, providing comfort, guidance, and insight without judgment or expectation. Beyond personal growth, the protagonist noticed the profound effect music had on empathy. By listening attentively and understanding the emotional depth in compositions, they began to relate more deeply to the feelings of others. Conversations became more thoughtful, relationships richer, and moments of conflict easier to navigate. Music had taught them to listen, not just to sound, but to people, situations, and the unspoken emotions around them. Exploration continued through lesser-known composers and hidden works. The protagonist discovered that music's value was not in fame, but in resonance. A composition that touched the heart regardless of popularity was as essential as any widely celebrated piece. This perspective encouraged open-mindedness, curiosity, and a willingness to embrace new experiences, reinforcing the lesson that beauty and insight could be found everywhere. If one was willing to look and listen, the protagonist also continued their own musical practice, though not professionally trained. Playing the piano or experimenting with melodies deepened their understanding of rhythm, harmony, and emotional expression. Each attempt brought appreciation for the effort behind the masterpieces and a sense of connection to the composers themselves. This hands-on engagement transformed passive listening into active participation, creating a dialogue between the listener and the music. Through reflection, journaling, and intentional listening, the protagonist realized that the 15 masterpieces represented more than individual experiences. They formed a holistic journey. Together, they mapped the emotional, intellectual, and spiritual dimensions of human experience. From joy to sorrow, energy to calm, complexity to simplicity, the music covered the full spectrum of life. Engaging with these compositions was a way of engaging with the world itself, learning to navigate emotions, challenges, and triumphs with sensitivity and awareness. One significant insight was the universality of music. The protagonist observed that regardless of language, culture, or background, music could communicate emotion directly. It transcended barriers and connected people on a fundamental level. This realization inspired a deeper appreciation for the power of art in general, and reaffirmed the relevance of classical music in contemporary life. It was proof that these masterpieces were timeless, offering lessons and experiences that were still meaningful centuries after their creation. The protagonist's understanding of time and patience also evolved. Listening to and reflecting on these masterpieces required space, focus, and presence. The fast pace of modern life often made such engagement challenging, yet the practice brought reward, calm, and perspective. They learned to slow down, to embrace the process, and to appreciate the journey as much as the destination. Music had taught them that richness in life often required attention, persistence, and an openness to experience. Emotional resilience was another key lesson. The compositions encompassed a wide range of human emotion, including sorrow, struggle, and longing. Listening attentively allowed the protagonist to explore their own feelings safely, providing catharsis and clarity. Music became a tool for understanding vulnerability, navigating difficult emotions, and appreciating the interplay of joy and sadness. Through this process, they developed a stronger, more nuanced emotional intelligence by sharing insights, playlists, and personal reflections. The protagonist found purpose in helping others experience the same transformative power. Witnessing friends and family engage deeply with music was rewarding, reinforcing the idea that these masterpieces could touch anyone willing to listen. The protagonist understood that music's impact was amplified when shared, creating connection, empathy, and mutual understanding. They had become both a student and a guide. Learning from the compositions while helping others discover their own experiences, The journey through the 15 masterpieces also fostered imagination and creativity. Listening carefully, the protagonist would visualize scenes, stories, or landscapes inspired by the music. They noticed the subtleties of emotional expression, the tension and release, the movement from simplicity to complexity. This visualization enhanced their understanding of narrative, character, and emotion, making the music a source of inspiration for writing, thinking, and problem-solving in other areas of life. The protagonist reflected on how classical music had changed their relationship with time. They had learned to experience moments fully, appreciating subtleties that might have gone unnoticed before. Music encouraged presence and mindfulness, teaching them to savor not just sound, but life itself. The compositions became anchors, helping them navigate both fast and slow moments with awareness and appreciation. Ultimately, the protagonist realized that the 15 essential masterpieces were more than a musical journey. They were a map for personal growth. Each piece offered lessons in resilience, patience, empathy, creativity, and emotional intelligence. Collectively, they created a framework for understanding life, providing guidance, reflection, and inspiration. The journey had transformed listening into living. Turning notes and melodies into a way of being, the protagonist's story concluded not with an end, but with continuity. Classical music had become a lifelong companion, offering infinite opportunities for discovery, reflection, and connection. The 15 masterpieces provided a foundation, but the journey would continue, expanding to new works, new performances, and new experiences. The lessons learned through music would guide them in all areas of life, reinforcing the value of attention, presence, and openness. Through this transformative journey, the protagonist had discovered that classical music was not merely art, it was life itself. It taught, healed, inspired, and connected. The 15 essential masterpieces had shaped not just their listening habits, but their heart, mind, and soul. They had become a testament to the enduring power of music, a reminder that beauty, emotion, and human connection could transcend time, touching lives in profound and lasting ways. The journey was complete in one sense, yet it was also just the beginning. As the world of music continued to offer endless opportunities for growth, reflection, and joy,